Hello, everyone. This is Eric Pennington, and welcome to the Spirit of EQ podcast. We're glad that you've tuned in. A few things we wanted to tell you at the beginning of the show, and that's this podcast was created to be a tool to help you, primarily to discover and grow your EQ. Science and our own lived experiences confirm that the better we are at managing our emotions, the better we're going to be at making decisions, which leads to a better life. And that's something we all want. We're glad that you've taken out the time today to listen and hope that something that you hear will lead to a breakthrough. Hey, one last thing. We'd really appreciate a review on whichever platform you use to listen. And if you want to, leave some comments about what you heard today, as well as follow and subscribe. That way you won't miss a single episode as we continue this journey. And with that, the show begins. Preston Zeller, welcome to the show.
Eric, it's so good to be with you. Thanks for having me join you, and I'm looking forward to chatting more.
Yeah, and for our audience, Preston, and we kind of talked about this in our little pre-recording meeting a couple of weeks ago, I think. We get pitches all the time to be on the show, and that's very gratifying. Yeah. And yours really stood out, and it's going to kind of be the launching pad for me. And one of the things that really pulled me in to want to talk to you about, and it's this, I'm going to call it an app. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less, but there's an app that you are behind called Psalm Log. Now, for those out there who heard Psalm, you probably picked it up that we're talking about the Psalms from the Bible. And as I dug deeper, even past your pitch, I'm going, man, this is a really cool app. So therefore, I reached out to you. And in our conversation, obviously, there's more in your world than just an app. And I want to go into some of that today. But could you tell our audience a little bit about your background and maybe what sort of led you to Psalm Log? And then we'll just keep rolling into different topics as well.
Yeah, perfect. So, I think Psalm Log fundamentally is a way to go get personalized biblical advice 24/7. The road to there, I think, like anything, was just super windy, and of course we're going to continue to evolve. I just pushed an update yesterday to the App Store that has a amazing kind of feature that we just have been working on. But the gist being, we live in a increasingly, I think, isolated age, but also very fast-paced age. And I think as believers, we know the Bible has answers for like anything we're going through, but how to find that, where to go, is very tough. It's not always clear too. Even if you read a verse, it might be like just a proverb, and you want to go deeper. And so it's just really supplementary tool to be able to do that. But I mean, for me personally, I've been a believer for over 15 years. Grew up in the church, went away from it, didn't really have a good intellectual understanding of my faith. And when I really committed my life to Christ, I went so all in. Like, I want to understand this on every possible level that I can. Of course, that's a lifelong pursuit. But sure. I'm really a student of Scripture, a student of what it means to follow Jesus, to be guided by the Holy Spirit, to live in a way that's distinct from the world. And I think we're testing that every day, of course. And so my background is also, I guess vocationally, in building technology and growing tech companies and all that kind of stuff, which I've mostly done really in the secular world for big, VC-backed companies and companies going IPO and getting acquired and all that stuff. Yeah. And so, I think at a certain point we all ask ourselves, at least this has been, my path of like, okay, God, well, I have all these skills and these opportunities you provide in this experience. What is the like maximum kingdom impact I can make? And I get, for some people that may just be raising your family, and that's great. I sit in this very strange, aspect or slice of the world that is based around technology being able to get into as many hands as possible. So it would be a shame not to put that to use in a really ethical way.
Right.
So yeah,
That's interesting. And Preston, our relationship with our audience, for many, it goes back maybe 5-7 years. So when I'm about to say is pretty consistent, probably for them, they know I'm one of the strange ones, and that equates to my being a 4 on the Enneagram. But I got to tell you, when I saw Psalm Log and again your pitch, I started thinking, man, this could be great for anyone. Now, I know some might say, but Eric, what if they don't believe in God? And Eric, what if they're Buddhist or something else? I was looking at it through this lens of when I'm journaling, when I'm trying to discover what's going on inside of me, my head, if you will, having something that can kind of be that. And I know we're going to talk about AI today, and I hopefully I'm not making too big of an assumption, but having a form of AI to be able to give me real-time feedback on what I'm thinking about or what I'm journaling about, regardless of the fact that it might say Psalm Log, could there be that component that gives me something that's very, very useful on my journey? Now, I'm unabashed. Yeah, I think the best possible way to live your life is connected to Jesus Christ. There's no getting around it.
Yeah.
But I love people, period. I don't care what religion. I don't care where they're from. Well, I do have some of my family probably, Preston, that sometimes I wonder.
we all have that. The people that are hard to love.
I got a little bit of that. But on the whole, right? So maybe to some degree, and we can come back to the Psalm Log, specifically the app and features, but let's talk about the AI component. I'm assuming, and please give me more, that you're using some type of AI to help in the app's responsiveness to the user. Am I getting that close?
Yeah, and I want to elaborate on that for a moment because I know people listening may have just varying shades of understanding of AI and all that kind of stuff. But something I'm starting up is it's called the Alliance for Faithful AI, and it's going to be based around believers who are practitioners in AI, building technology to ultimately fulfill the Great Commission. And I think that is the really interesting point we're at right now is like, if you look at the Gutenberg press, what if we shied away from that? What if we're like, no, scripture should just be on scrolls or should just be handwritten. This printing press thing is crazy. What if we did that? Right. In retrospect, it is laughable. And so yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yes, it is using large language models, and it's using those. I'll just define the technology behind it. It's called RAG prompting. So RAG stands for retrieval augmented generation. And so, suppose there's someone who's saying, oh, they're just chatting with whatever tool, right? This is taking your personalized situation that you've spoken out and combining that with the context of Bible verses that you're tagging in your journal, and then a ton of other sophisticated stuff in the background to then also take advantage of our large language model that has access to an insane amount of information, finds those patterns, and then presents it to you in a structured manner.
Yeah. So with that, I'm going to give you an example of something that I encountered. So this has probably been about a month ago, it was maybe a little past or near Christmas time. I've been having these recurring dreams, right? And I'm not the person that wakes up after a dream and writes it down, right? It's just not how I roll. But It might be a cue that I should, but
Yeah.
having said this recurring dream really had me curious, right? And I decided to go to a chat bot and kind of use some prompts around this is the dream,
Mm.
this is what happened in the dream, could it possibly be connected to? I even went the route of saying, uh, use or reference Carl Jung's approach to dreams and
Mm-hmm.
such. And it was fascinating to me what came back. And I understand large language models in the sense that chatbots and keep me honest here, Preston. Um, they're scouring what's out there to come back to you with some type of information. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, in a sense, yeah. I mean,
In a general way, right?
yeah.
And I would imagine some chatbots are more sophisticated than others. Some are
Hmm.
much more robust, and on and on.
Yeah.
But it was undeniable the conclusions that it helped me come to.
Hmm.
Not it wasn't like here's your answer, Eric. This is what the dream meant. Full stop. It
Hmm.
was more of it got me to reflect,
Hmm.
right? Because I believe I have a healthy skepticism of AI, at least in the general sense out there,
Hmm.
whether it's Grok or ChatGPT or Anthropic or whatever.
Yeah.
I believe my skepticism is somewhat healthy, and
Yeah.
I kind of define that, Preston, as I'm not going full bore to believe that everything that comes back to me is absolutely 100% accurate and true, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I found it powerful that it did encourage my reflection on the dream,
Mm.
what it possibly meant. Could it be something in my subconscious that maybe, and in my faith walk, maybe God is wanting to get my attention
Yeah.
about to address? And it just made me realize that even though so much of the hype around AI, so much of the media exposure to AI, it just goes so, I mean, the swings are so vast, right? That one might go either, I think it's something that's going to usher in the end of the world, or I think it's something that's going to actually solve every single problem of the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a long way around to say, um, how has your audience, those that are using Psalm Log or even those that you're interacting with other projects within the Christian community, maybe as we'll start,
Mhm.
how are they viewing AI current day from what you've been seeing and hearing?
Well, I mean, look, if you there's a great book called Crossing the Chasm that
Hmm.
describes the 5 stages of product adoption.
Hmm.
And there's always a long tail of that on the I mean, the left being like immediate and the far right on that bell curve being people who are the skeptics.
Right.
And so you have these 5 categories. The first 2 are generally speaking like the people that are bleeding edge, I'll try anything. And then the next
Yeah.
one's like, the people that are kind of, they're more open to trying new things, but they're not trying the latest, beta of anything out there. And then there's a pretty big gap between that and like mass market. So I use that as a parallel because it's I think pretty applicable in any kind of context. So of course the people building with AI, yeah, we're all very bullish on it in the sense of, hey, this is a real tool. And I think more than anything, we understand what is going on to the best degree we can, and are, you know, trying to find ethical ways of using it that is ultimately different than, say, how the secular world is going to build with these applications. And that's really kind of at the crux of it, is going, okay, well, these tools are getting built, right? The tools
Hmm.
that maybe let's say the church at large could be fearful of, and kind of use that as a paralysis. um you could sit back, but what you're really doing is handing over the keys to people who don't fundamentally believe the same way we do. And there's a danger in that as well. And I go back to the parable of talents in that, right?
No, sure.
The guy that buries his the king's gold, right? Or the talents, he's called wicked. And so God's allowed these tools to be made for a reason, of course. So the makers are, of course, like, hey, let's figure out a way to use this. This isn't scary.
Right.
And then I think we're on the extreme end, of course, you have, I think, people who have bought into, frankly, fear mongering that's even coming from, I don't know if it's well-meaning Christians or what, but I've seen videos my wife has showed me where I'm like, this was so manipulated to strike fear. And this person's calling themselves a believer. I'm like, that's really, I don't know, it just seems disingenuous to me. Because, I mean, to say that even like, oh, well, you know, you can just manipulate an LLM to say what you want in most cases.
Yep.
Even if you get it to, you trick it to be a certain role and it bypasses its guardrails or something like that. So, and then in the middle, I think there's a lot of people that are open. It's just people who want answers, and they're gonna discern between things. And I think what you said earlier was so on point, Eric, about like, hey, you received this information you got about your dreams and thought about it, and it's not going to be 100% right, which is the case with everything. You go to a Sunday teaching, you go to a seminar, you go read a devotional book, there's always going to be things that were like, I don't know, that just seemed a little off to me, or just, you disagree with those non-salvation issues about whatever it is. Or you get someone who's just like straight up going off the rails, and you're like, wait a second, I think they just invited in universalism, whatever the case is.
Yeah. So, within that, I got to thinking, this idea, and obviously in the world of Spirit of EQ, we're all about human innovation, right? Human intelligence, not at the cost of artificial intelligence, but we believe that if technology as it relates to AI is moving upward, northward, right? Human beings should be operating in tandem with that. Now, as I look across sort of the cultural plane, I do see an inverted or an incongruent line happening, right? Or lines. But we're doing everything we can. And that experience with my dream and using the technology was so helpful in me understanding AI supported the human piece of me. The way that I process things and reflect on things and the decisions I make, which is tied tremendously to emotional intelligence, right? And I find that to be the healthy route. My concern around artificial intelligence, regardless of whether someone is a Christian, non-Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, whatever it may be, agnostic, is that they will begin to cede their agency over to a platform or a technology, right? And begin to weaken that muscle of the human, right? And we all know what happens with muscle when it's not used and built and exercised. It goes to atrophy, right? And I have a real concern around that one because I have people in my orbit, and our audience knows, Preston, maybe you don't. I've written a couple of books over my window of time and on this planet, and I wrote every single word, right? But I have some people in my orbit that push out books like week and a half, 2 weeks. Now, it could be that Eric Pennington is really not that great of a writer, and he needs to take the time that it takes. And maybe I'm just in the presence of people who are so unbelievably gifted in their writing that they can push out a book in that short a period of time. And for our audience, I am not judging how someone approaches the writing process, but I just think in some senses it can be a little slippery if we are allowing something that is artificial to basically override or to dominate the human side. And I'm going to say this really quickly, Preston. One of the best things that came out of me writing those two books was not so much that the books got released and I got a cover and a physical copy and all. It was what it did inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
The discipline of it, the editing process, and kind of struggling with what do I mean when I say that, and what is the point here. I think that's that exercising of the muscle, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's your approach when you encounter those who maybe are not so keen on it? Maybe they think the idea of a Psalm log app is cool, but when they discover that there's some AI driven technology behind it, they become a little apprehensive. Is there a way in which you communicate with them to, I'm not saying to convert them, but certainly to maybe give them a different view?
Yeah, I mean, I think, AI as a tool is certainly one of those. If someone's really, oh man, all AI is terrible. I'm like, throw away every electronic you own. Just do it. Go be Amish,
Right.
go be Amish, whatever. Like
Yep.
it's sort of a matter of like consistency in many ways. Like, okay,
Yeah.
if you're gonna just call this entire umbrella of technology this evil thing, I'm like, then you don't realize you've been using AI for decades. And
Right. Even before it became popular, right?
yeah, and people synonymize it with ChatGPT, which is like that's just one thing, But I'm never, of course, I'm never gonna want to like try to shame someone into using Psalm
Sure.
log or something. I'm like, my question would be, have you tried something like that? Or what are you afraid of? And if it's really like not for you, then fine. Like what's maybe an even better question is like, do you have a relationship with God even? What is that like? But I think you said something interesting too, which is, hopefully people don't become stagnant, kind of check their brain at the door, whatever the case, they're kind of makes them more lazy. But I think that's actually part of the problem we have right now in general, Eric, is how many people go to church on a Sunday and that's kind of it, right?
Yeah.
We have a pejorative of Sunday Christians, and that's not to, shame anyone in that sense. It's just that life is seeming to get faster and more kind of wild with the amount of information we consume and devices and all that kind of stuff. And so it's sort of like, hey, is the problem also the answer? And that's where I think again, coming back to where as believers we can check out and go, that whole category is a problem. Let's just like tell people it's all bad, or let's ignore it. And I'm like, the reality is we don't. How many people do you know are living super remotely? They never use social media. They don't use the internet. I mean, it's like no one. They're not going to be listening to this podcast, probably.
Right.
Okay, these things are here, but then the sort of the discernment of how we use these things, what kind of balance do we have? And also, I mean, nothing's going to replace, of course, being in the Word, being in one-on-one relationship with God. But that's, I mean, I love engaging with people who are kind of like, I don't know, lapsed in their faith, for lack of a better word, or just maybe you come from this like a Catholic guilt side of things. It's just like where you go, well, God can never forgive me for all these things, or I'm damaged goods, or all this kind of stuff. These are questions I've been having to work through. If someone goes into Psalm log and voices that, because they're too afraid of the judgment they're going to get walking into a formal environment and sharing that with anyone. So I'm like, well, how can they better actually, how can at least my tool answer those questions in a like emotive way? It's kind of a strange thing to work through. So there's just so much there's so much gray area in all this, and I'm trying to be as thoughtful as I can with how Psalm log, through really technology at the end of the day, is going to help them. And ultimately, I'm looking to try to partner with organizations to give people the help they need beyond just like using the app. I don't want people to just go be like dependent on Psalm Log for the rest of their life. That's not the goal.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because I would imagine that if someone is dealing with shame, for example, right? And my experience with shame is that it creates almost like you're in a car that's stuck in a mud and the tires are just spinning. You can't seem to get out, right? Having access to, okay, this is the response you got in the app, and there's always various psychological, clinical help that you can reach out to if the ditch is too deep or the mud is too, too voluminous, I guess, if I would say it that way. Because I understand about being stuck, right? And quite frankly, again, as I echoed in earlier, I know, Preston, I'm one of the strange ones. I'm thinking, even if you don't even know, maybe you don't even know that Jesus was a true historical figure. I mean, the Psalms, even if you didn't put the name Psalms on it, it's some of the most beautiful, poetic, raw, deep, emotive, as you alluded to, text that I don't know about you. Well, yeah, I think I can say my gut says that you would understand this, right? How many times have you read a psalm and you feel like, wow, I'm understood. I know what this is like, I think about Psalm 94, I'm slipping. I cried out, renewed my hope and cheer. The idea that, man, I'm slipping. I need someone to grab my hand. I mean, again, could there be people that can't get past, the label of a psalm, God, Jesus, or all that kind of stuff? But I would think in a time like we live in, just having that glimmer of encouragement and hope would draw you there, right? I want to kind of go back to what you were saying, as far as, I think you used the term Sunday Christians, and it made me think about, our willingness to put in the quote work that is necessary to grow and to be stronger. And I don't mean under our own abilities alone, but I had a conversation with two physicians in the last week, and I'm sitting with one in a social environment and the other one was in an actual appointment for me. And I asked them both, I said, of the problems that people come into you for, what percentage of those are driven by lifestyle? Both of them, 90%.
Yeah.
And I go, oh my gosh. And I said to both of them, history, I think, will one day look back on this 21st century United States of America, maybe the Western world, and it will wonder, why didn't they use the tools they had at their disposal to address their problems? I find that to be the height of sad irony, right? And when I think about, again, I know I'm almost giving you a commercial, Preston. When I think about Psalm Log, I think, man, that's like a tool. That's like an exercise bike in a gym, or a set of weight machines in a gym to strengthen those. So with that, I also want to bring to our audience, and this was so funny when you originally reached out. I'm thinking Psalm Log, it's an app, there's some AI, but as I dug a bit deeper into your background and into the things that you've done, I was so fascinated by a documentary that you were involved in or created. You may have to edit me on that, but about the art of grieving. And selfishly speaking, from probably the latter part of 23 through the majority of 25, I had a mixture of various situations, life events where grieving was a part of it. How about we start with, can you talk about the art of grieving? Because it's not just a title for a book or a movie. Can you talk about that? And then I want to ask you some other questions that inform.
Yeah. So real quick, I want to touch on the Psalms. I think why those are so good is because it's like captures the real human essence of grief, right?
Yeah.
The name Psalm Log was just really like Psalms are the Psalms are, a lot of their songs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just that idea of spoken word and logging spoken word. So that's kind of where the name comes from. But the art of grieving, man, when I look back on it, that was such a instrumental part of me even going in to make Psalm Log. I just didn't really connect the dots until later on. But about 7 years ago, next month, my brother passed away from an unexpected drug overdose. He was 35. So he's my older brother. And I've outlived him at this point, which is kind of crazy. But I was very deep into abstract painting at the time. And I threw myself into this year-long painting project. I actually wrote in a journal like one line. It was paint every day for a year and make a documentary about it. So,
wow.
I didn't know how the documentary was going to be made. I'm just like, well, do this thing. So this was late 2019 that I started the painting. And the idea there is just that I had a lot to get out. I think, anyone who's gone through, kind of an intense grief can, validate that, grief. Part of the confusing thing about grief is it's not just an emotion. It's often a multitude of those things. You're kind of feeling them at the same time. And so it's confusing. It's just like, I think we're used to being able to identify, hey, I'm sad, or I feel depressed, or I'm angry, or fearful, or whatever the case is. But that you can go through a lot of them at the same time. And so I was really using painting as my, cathartic outlet. And I thought, okay, if I can do this in these small study paintings and then have a way to look back on it at the end of the day, that for me would be helpful. And then I'm going to share that journey along the way. And so I did that on social media. And ultimately the part of the goal being, I'm going to reassemble all of these paintings into one giant paint mosaic at the end of it. And I was going to reorganize them in such a way to have a final image that kind of, to me, reflected what grief felt like. And so that's what we did. And so that's kind of what the documentary revolves around. Is it's, of course, telling my story a bit. How did I even get here? Telling like, okay, what, not just the loss of my brother, but what did it mean to go through that painting, the process as we're installing this? It was a 10-foot by 20-foot mosaic in my house.
Wow.
Yeah. So in the documentary, I bring this scissor lift into my house, which was a ridiculous experience.
I bet.
And then assembling this, it had 4,500 lights behind it. But really at the end of the day, again, it was, I wanted to understand myself through this and go through this reflective process. We bring in an art therapist, and she talks about grief from more of a clinical side and our, grief in general. And then one of the interesting things I did, Eric, too, there's kind of this chunk of the documentary that goes back into like art history, right? So it's like, how do cultures deal with grief through art? How do individuals deal with grief through art? What artists have turned to different kind of subject matters to express their grief when they experience a death? All these different aspects of art and time. And, you start to realize like what's the most depicted moment of grief in history. What would that be to you? From an artistic standpoint, what do you think's been recreated the most?
Oh, it's got to be Christ on the cross.
100%. That is it. Yeah. And so I'm like, oh, and then you go back and read the Psalms and you read all these other things and you're like, well, grief is all over Scripture. Oh, and before you go through that, it just didn't hit you as much. So that was my way of, I guess, my contribution to, the fact that we're not good at talking about grief. That we often feel alone in our grief, even though God's there 100%. That it's a weird thing to navigate, and that people just kind of expect you to move on, get over it, tell you lots of
It's interesting.
cliches.
I got to interrupt you there,
Yeah.
Preston, because when my dad passed, and this has been probably close to 17 years, that was my first sort of encounter as an adult of losing someone that was close to me, right? And that grieving process was so interesting to me. And where I'm going with this is the flurry of activity right after he passed, right? The process dealing with the hospital or funeral arrangements, burial, post, people reaching out, let me know if I can do anything. I'm really sorry, blah, blah, blah. And what I'm saying here is none of them were disingenuous in those sentiments, right? But the silence that came about 3 weeks later, where people, they stopped reaching out, right? And I had a few that did, but that swell of sentiment was now gone. And I remember feeling like I was looking around, like I was on this walk, and on the walk in the beginning, I had many people around me, but in mile 5, there's like maybe 1 or 2. And then at times it felt like I'm walking alone. And I never felt alone. Well, yeah, I did. I did have times where I wondered, well, I can't seem to put my finger on where God is at.
Sure. Yeah.
Which in hindsight was really healthy too, because to come to the conclusion that I don't have to have a physical sensation of his presence in order for me to know that he's doing something inside of me, right? And I remember that after that time that I quote swore that I was not going to allow someone in my life that was close to me get to that 3-month period and go, where'd everybody go? Everybody, I didn't want them to feel like, well, people have moved on now. They had to get back to work. They had to go back to, and then you feel this sense of being forgotten. And I'm so glad I did that, because obviously in 17 years, I've had people close to me that have lost someone they love. And Preston, I hopefully you get my sentiment in that this is not because I'm the great Eric Pennington. This is purely driven by disciplined, I got to do this. And I reach out by text 7 months later, 1.5 years later. Hey, I just want to let you know I haven't forgotten. Because for me in my grieving process with my dad, it was about 2 years. Where I could say I went through each of those valleys and peaks and whatever you want to call it to come out on the other side. So I insert that in the sense that the documentary, was there some sense of that was your offering to the world as well, as far as what people could learn, or was it just purely, hey, this is what I did, this is what I experienced?
I think my offering in that was that a lot of people feel alone in their grief. Kind of what you're saying as well, after, 2-3 weeks, everyone's just kind of back to business. And, I can't blame people in that regard.
Sure.
Cause it's just like, it's hard to keep tabs on everyone, and we all get sucked into our own life. But these things are happening every day, all the time. Someone's, you're losing somebody. But I think more than just the, hey, let me share my story. It was, hey, you're going to need to do something with that grief. Pushing it down is profoundly unhealthy. And there's all sorts of research that reveals that. So where does it go? Are you going to develop destructive habits? That happens too. Or are you going to do something to actually grow yourself? And, most people realize that after a period of time in grief is that you have to grow around the grief. It doesn't shrink. And that's like the even when I first learned that, I'm like, oh, totally different. And I'm a like growth mindset type person. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are too, and you yourself. But I don't know. I don't think most people are kind of like that. It's just like steady Eddie, then something kind of throws you off your tracks.
Sure. Yep.
So I wasn't aware really of any great sort of like art therapy or, artistically inspired grief recovery process that I had ever seen. So I'm like, well, I'm going to go through this. I might as well share it. I have, again, this other strange piece in my background that gives me the confidence that I can make something like this happen. And it was, I really didn't know what to expect when it first came out. Honestly, I thought people would just lace me for being this like narcissist who wanted to share my work and, through
Right.
this like terrible time. And that, turns out really none of that's been true, that it's gone all these places that I never thought it would. And the amount of comments the personal feedback I've received or the way people have used it, just going, I never thought of art as a healing mechanism, which is baffling to me because it was an obvious thing to me. But I think that's just how maybe removed we are from being creative. Maybe as a meta level, writing, drawing, painting, whatever it is. And a lot of it defaults to go talk to somebody. And we talk about this in the documentary, where like the hard thing about that is you go talk to somebody, but then you forget what you said. It's just like, it's hard to have anything to go back and reflect on. Hey, am I learning? Am I growing throughout this period? So whatever it is, even a combination of these things, and I went to a grief therapist too. It's just, if I could at least show, here's what I did, and that gets you off on the idea of, let me go buy paint at Goodwill and just put it on a canvas. Even if you do it once and that makes you feel better, it's going to hopefully be a catalyst to some better change.
Yeah. And we'll be back to the episode after this. Jeff, what is the SEQ Development Report?
I'm glad you asked me that, Eric. The SEQ Development Report is something that we here at Spirit of EQ have developed to blend the idea of emotional intelligence with a person's spiritual life. And we're not talking about religion. We're talking about how they connect with themselves, other people, and the world around them.
Why is it important?
I think it's important because it allows someone to see where they stand, to give them information about maybe parts of their life they may need to work on, parts of their life that they're really doing well, and learn to leverage it. And it just gives a person a better way of getting through the world.
So how do you get this report?
Well, first, you need to contact us. Info at Spirit of EQ is just a great way to do it. Then you would take an assessment, 15, 20 minutes, done online. And then after that, the report requires a debrief to go through all the things in it, because it's got a ton of information. And then if you want to further your journey, we can do coaching and things like that with you down the road. And that's basically it.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff. And now back to the episode. I think, your point about at a meta level and our approach to creativity, I think in so many ways, Preston, we as a culture, and regardless of whether you say it's secular or non-secular, we have bought into the world system's sort of prescription of, if I work and I accumulate and I have and I prepare for, then I'm good. And you and I probably, we know people who, they sacrificed health, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, to build a retirement for 40 years. And then in their head, it was, now I'm going to.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I think that's a tremendously dangerous assumption to make, that you can do that to yourself over that many decades and then expect that you're going to be in a place to be that person that you put pause on. And this is not me advocating and telling entrepreneurism is the path to go. And I'm not giving any advice. I'm just making that observation that maybe if we were more open to the creative side of things, when the storms come, a la the passing of someone you love, you have some resources built to go to. And in your case, obviously, and let me be careful. Were you always a painter, an artist in that regard? Was that always part of your background?
I've been an artist my whole life, so yeah.
Okay, so you had that resource.
Yeah, music, painting, a lot of lots of things. Yeah,
and I love how you said it too, Preston. It's like, even if you just take some paint and you put it on the canvas, and because it's not an art show, you're not going to be exhibiting at whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I would say that about songwriting. I mean, just go ahead and write the song, and it doesn't matter if the chord changes are not going to be, or if the microphone's a little faulty when you sing it, because the objective is not to build something for it to be consumed by the public, as it is something for you to process and bring healing. So, if I may ask, what kind of reception did you get for the film? Because I know the film was released. Why don't you tell our audience, when was the film released?
Yeah, so about summer 2022.
Okay.
And so it got into film festivals, and it won numerous awards in film festivals. And then and that was actually kind of surprised me in a way, because I was like, I guess it's decent enough to do that. which there's tons of film festivals. We had a premiere at an art festival by the same name that happens in the UK every year. So we had a premiere there. And then I was involved in a lot of grief groups at the time, like online, and I just kind of started sharing it in some of those places. Some of them didn't like it. They're like, "Don't share this documentary." I'm like, "Okay, well, whatever." But it eventually started getting around enough. I did podcasts for that, word of mouth, and I had people start emailing me for, they leave reviews online. They were emailing me, and surely not everyone likes it, which I don't really care. Even if you hate me in the process, but it gets you to think about, your own grief, then great. But generally, it just seemed that people didn't feel as alone. I mean, that they didn't feel as alone, and they saw that there was like a potential way out of it. And so many people, I mean, I think one of the common themes is people just saying, "I never thought about art," and people saying, "I just went and picked up paints and I tried painting," and like that in and of itself was just, this is wow, and it's being used in some amount of like curriculums in schools now. I've seen it, that traffic come across through my site, and I've seen a dissertation paper written in like Finland that uses it, and random things like that. And it seems to be a way that ultimately people are saying, "Oh, okay, this is like kind of, somewhat of an authoritative account of," or they're making it authoritative, I guess, account on what it looks like to use art, because that's really like back to the creative process. I think just knowing it can open up your mind to an alternative possibility. You're not stuck. You may feel stuck, but there's some way out of it. And if we even have that hope, then we're going to be in such a better place. But that's where the depression, the anxiety comes from, is like, I can't, I'm trying to control things I can't, or I can't make change in a way that I thought I could, or it's like, no, you can make the change just one step at a time.
Yeah. And, I know from my experience in grieving, because what I found in our conversation that you and I share two older brothers who passed away from drug overdoses.
Mm-hmm.
Mine in 2024. And I know as my situation, and it was different than it was with my dad, because, my brother had, I mean, it was decades of drug use, and it had taken so much of his soul that the person he was before he passed was not who I knew as my brother.
Yep.
And I'm so glad that I had this work of EQ that I had been involved in and been developing and, obviously teaching it and coaching to it and all of those things, because it informed me from the perspective of go ahead and feel what you feel.
Mm.
And I kind of use the term, I've used it here on the podcast, I use it in talks, is that go ahead and give your emotions the mic.
Mm.
And just let them say what they want and need to say. And this is coming from a guy, Preston, who I always thought I was Superman. So if I'm Superman, then I shouldn't be, this shouldn't bother me as much.
Yeah.
I should be able to get this fixed now. And then I'm strong, I'm powerful. And so to tell that version of Eric that, hey, give your emotions the mic, I would see that as a sign of defeat. When in reality, what I have learned, and I'm, again, so thankful for this work, is that actually it's one of the strongest moves you can make, because you're sitting with it. You're allowing it to hear it and letting it absorb. Then you can make decisions and decide what you're going to do next and what might be the better outlet. Because my experience is if you're not allowing your emotions to have a voice, you're probably in this, I'm trying to control everything. Your ego is driving, if you will. That's so great. So when we think about, I'm going to kind of pivot back to the Psalm log. And I know at the beginning I talked about, it doesn't matter, maybe somebody who's agnostic could gain something from it.
Oh yeah.
I want to ask your thoughts about that. Whether you have encountered people who maybe were faith neutral or no faith at all, who found value in it, and can it be something, right, that someone of, again, no faith or no association could gain some value from it?
Yeah. So short answer, 100% they could. And that's what in the recent release I just did, that's one of the kind of like guardrails that was built in, was to, better speak to the person who's coming from a different faith, or, maybe you're, you don't believe in like a biblical perspective, but maybe you want it. I mean, and I think that's like a misnomer in, the Christian world is how you approach like the gospel with people who may not believe it the same way you do, maybe outside of it. Some of the easiest people to talk to about the Bible are people who are like, yeah, I'm just kind of a student of, theology in the general sense. I would love to learn your perspective. So yeah, I do think people can absolutely get something out of it, but and it's ultimately going to be always kind of point back to, the deity of Christ and the triune God and those kinds of things. But again, that's what you would expect if you went into like a Christian counselor. You would, I should say biblical counseling, there are nuance and all that. That's what you would expect to get, is that perspective. So, but yeah, I don't, and that's come up a lot actually, Eric, which is funny. Maybe just God speaking to me through all these different people, like your question, because I never thought about it like that. And then all these people are like, this could help so many people outside of Christianity. I'm like, yeah. The first time that was mentioned to me, I'm like, that's not the point. and then the second person brings it up. The third person, it's been brought up. I don't know, quite a few times now, which is why I kind of made a way for it to be addressed. So, yeah, I mean, I think regardless of like where you're coming from, like God wants to know you. And so whatever that, whether you're doing that through Psalm log, or you're just reading the Bible, whatever, it's like your problems are not beyond God.
Yeah.
And I think it's an easy thing to think, like, right, you said during grief, it's just like, God doesn't get any of this. It's like, well, go look at the secular historical accounts of what Christ went through. It's you could look at those, you could look at the Bible. It's like, it's just insane stuff. Go watch The Passion of the Christ. Is just like a glimpse of what that was. I think it was probably a lot worse than that. But
yeah, I was thinking about it too. I had a couple of friends who, which was odd for me, they asked me the question that you don't really talk a lot about God, and I mean, and as I'm listening to them, and then I'm going, you know what? And maybe this is because I do have a strong connection, as our audience would know, probably to nausea at this point, my appreciation of Miles Davis. And not so much the human being, not so much even his music, right? Yeah. As much as the true art of what he did and how he approached it.
Yeah.
And he was very much a fewer notes, but most powerfully placed in a song, right? And there's an old saying, and I can't give credit because I don't remember who it came from, but the quote goes, "Preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words."
Yeah,
right. And that always drew me in, because I thought, this idea of salt and light. There's this idea that you don't need a flurry of notes, because typically when we're using so many words, and I mean, there's just this, again, avalanche, there's typically going to be an issue in that communication. So I said to them, I'm using fewer notes these days, right? And I have a story with that too, and I was alluding to, there was a musician that played with Miles. He was a younger guy, and obviously getting that gig was a big deal because he's touring with him and the whole 9 yards. And he was just it was nerve-wracking for him, because it wasn't just like it was Miles and him were the talented musicians. The drummer was, the bass player was, the keyboard, all of them were high-level, accomplished musicians. And he went to Miles and said, I can't seem to, and I think I got to keep up, and I got to, because I'm with you and I'm with you. And Miles said to him, maybe you should consider playing half the notes you play. Yeah. And Miles had that way about him, right? Which was just these little quick, maybe you're playing too many notes. Maybe there's more value in 50% than there is in that 100% that you keep putting out there, right? And I get it. Some of this is style and an approach and personality, and I am more reflective. I'm the deep end of the pool. I'm gonna be careful about how I deliver, because I do believe that. But I think there's something to it as well, that if we're creating, whether it's a product, a tool, an app, or whatever, allow some space for people, right? Allow them to come to it, not because I convinced you that this is the best thing ever. But as always, Preston, whenever I start running up against the clock, I go, man, this is a great show. I could just keep going. But I am not Andrew Huberman, so I don't do 3-hour podcasts. Having said that, I do want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit, maybe, what's something that you're working on in the current frame that's really got you excited? Be it a product, be it a project, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I mean, Psalm log for sure. And that I have to give space to. That's a good way of putting it. I love the music references because I'm a blues guitarist too. So
that's right. I remember you mentioning that to me in our talk. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, aside from Psalm log, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but So Alliance for Faithful AI. I'm starting that to really bring together people who are in the Christian world, and they want to understand how is, like, we need to pool our resources and also have like a sort of guiding track behind how we're using AI responsibly, ethically. And so I'm in the process of that as well. I mean, I think part of where I'm hoping to get with Psalmlog is actually like top-down distribution into universities. I mean, Gen Z is for sure in this realm of needing, I think, having a broad scope of like society, cultural issues. I mean, just a plethora of different topics that they want guidance on. So Psalmlog can help do that from a biblical perspective, then great. Otherwise, I'm, kind of tinkering with, I have other little projects that I just actually launched one today that's more around for people who need to do like competitive research for apps and that kind of stuff. So I, periodically I'll work on a new product, and of course I go back to my existing ones, improve those, and just developing more relationships and being on, your podcast and others to just, bring my perspective and hopefully just connect with other people. So
no, that's awesome. And we are so appreciative that you carved out the time to be on the show. And certainly you can take that as we'd like to have you back. So if time allows for you and such. So with that, once again, Preston, thank you for coming on. And for our audience, we appreciate you joining as always. And we look forward to the next time that we're together. Take care. Hi, everyone. This is Eric again. A couple of things as we've ended the show. We hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully, you're tuning in on a regular basis. We'd love it if you would give us a great review on whatever platform you're listening to the podcast. It's so appreciative and helps us as we try to get more exposure for the work we do and the episodes that we publish. And we're grateful to you as a listener. The second thing is, just remember, our content is for educational purposes only. It's not intended by any stretch to diagnose or to treat anything that may be occurring in your life or anyone else's life that you may be connected to through the podcast. But once again, we appreciate you tuning in to the shows. And as always, we look forward to the next time that we're together. Take care.